This is Dr. Michael Cameron. Welcome back to the Registered Behavior Technician series, and this is module number 3. Within the context of our module today, I will be integrating an interview with a sibling of a child with disabilities. Her name's Annette. She's an adult sibling, and she'll be talking about her perspective as a family member in terms of working with individuals within your capacity. That is, people that are registered behavior technicians. Specifically, in terms of the module, this is Registered Behavior Technician Task List Item F03, and the title of the presentation is Communication with Stakeholders as Authorized. Specifically, we'll be talking about families and other professionals and communication with them. The specific module goals are first to define what a stakeholder is, and then next to discuss the principle of normalization and what's referred to as people-first language. The third goal is to provide an introductory overview of Osgood's semantic differential and to discuss on point our verbal behavior and our language and how language impacts other individuals, because it does in a very relevant way. The fourth goal is to delineate the other disciplines a registered behavior technician will interface with, and to continue to emphasize the value of a strength-based approach. And then finally, the fifth goal is to highlight the importance of a comprehensive and interdisciplinary team and communication with such a team. The total duration of today's module is 60 minutes, and about 10 minutes of that will involve an interview with Annette. And as I've done in previous modules, you will have a short quiz at the end. And also I want you to look for the bullseye during the course of the module as we advance through it, because that will indicate to you that there's important information being discussed, and that important information will show up on a quiz and certainly at the end of the series during the comprehensive exam. Over on the left side of the screen, there's a picture of Dr. Wolfensberger, and this is an individual who did a lot of work, especially in the 1970s in Canada, and he popularized the principle of normalization and discussed in detail the relevance of the principle, which will be defined in this module. But normalization has had a significant effect on the way services for people with disabilities have been structured throughout the United Kingdom, Europe, North America, Australia, and increasingly in other parts of the world as well. On the right side of the screen, we have an overview of the types of individuals and profiles of the individuals that you will come in contact with and work with, and that is neuropsychologists or neurologists, physicians, speech and language pathologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, social workers, and of course at the center of it all are the individuals that directly receive services from you. As I also like to do, I'll give you an overview of things that you've learned already. And so far you've learned the definition of applied behavior analysis. You've been introduced to Dr. B.F. Skinner. This is somebody that many of you have known from previous studies or even current studies in college, but an important figure in the field of behavior analysis for certain. You've also learned about functional behavior assessments, evidence-based practices, and you've learned a lot about outcomes, and specifically behavioral cusp, and that being the ultimate kind of outcome. You've learned about skills assessments. We've talked about the VV map. We've talked about the Vineland as well. That will play an important role in your work. You've also learned about programmed instruction, and then things that your supervisor, the board-certified behavior analyst, will be interested in when that person is supervising you, and specifically that is procedural reliability and inter-observer agreement in terms of their data collection as it compares to yours. You also learned about clinical audits, the value of an interdisciplinary team, and we talked about your supervisor and the goals that that person will set for you as well. So that's a bit of an inventory in terms of things that you've learned already. With respect to stakeholders, these are individuals by definition that may be affected by the services that you're delivering, or they can be individuals that have an impact or an effect on the services. And those individuals may include people that have a strong interest in a particular cause. That person may come from the field of academia. They may come from a philosophical arena, or they may be involved for political reasons. Even though their family, friends, or associates are not directly impacted by a particular disability, they remain greatly interested in the kind of work that you're doing and the impact of the work that you're doing. So stakeholders include, first and foremost, family members. These are individuals that are certainly impacted by your competence, your abilities, and your capabilities in terms of doing your work. Other stakeholders include public school members, and that would be teachers from public schools, public school administrators, for example. These are individuals that are stakeholders. These are individuals as well who are impacted by the services that you're delivering. Also, from an academic standpoint, which I just touched on a moment ago, people from university settings. So, for example, in my own state, and a university that I have a lot of respect for is the California State University in Northridge. They have a program in behavior analysis. It's a master's program in behavior analysis. So the graduate students coming out of that program do ultimately move on to become board-certified behavior analysts. But the faculty members there and the graduate students have a very important interest in the kind of work that registered behavior technicians do, because it is you as an individual that will essentially drive the reputation of the field of behavior analysis. You are the individual that will demonstrate the efficacy of a behavior analytic approach, and you are essentially an ambassador in terms of behavior analytic services. So those individuals, faculty members, academics, also have a very strong interest in the work that you're doing. So they too are stakeholders. So in summary, family members are stakeholders, public school administrators and teachers are stakeholders, and university faculty are stakeholders as well. And of course, politicians. There are many politicians that do a lot of advocacy, especially for insurance coverage, for example, for various disability groups, so that family members can receive funding and financial support so that services can be delivered. So their advocacy is closely tied to your competency and also the competency of the board-certified behavior analysts that are delivering services. So we have a lot of stakeholders in our field, and that's an overview of some of the individuals. One of the things that I want to emphasize in terms of communication with stakeholders is that the communication, the conversation that you're having with other individuals is ongoing. And there's a quote here that I just want to touch on by Yehuda Berg. And he says that words are singularly the most powerful force available to humanity. We choose to use this force constructively with words of encouragement or destructively using words of despair. And words have energy and power with the ability to help, to heal, to hinder, to hurt, to harm, or to humiliate and to humble. Just a fantastic quote, because the way we talk with other individuals, the way we interact with them matters tremendously. And we can influence relationships, and we can influence a person's perspective regarding the work that we're doing just by the words that we're using. Now, Yehuda Berg is a founder of the Kabbalah Center, and he was named number 4 in Newsweek's list of America's top 50 rabbis. So poignant words here, and very relevant as far as I'm concerned, with respect to the work that we're doing as well. Now, I want to touch on the concept of normalization, and you see the bullseye here. So that means that this information is important and will show up on the quiz, and certainly in the comprehensive examination. Popularized once again by Wolfensberger, the principle of normalization means making available to all people with disabilities the patterns of life and conditions of everyday living which are as close as possible to regular circumstances and way of life of society. What that means is that our goal in working with an individual that has any form of disability, whether it be autism spectrum disorder, or whether it be a psychiatric condition or a physical disability, our goal is to normalize that individual's life and to make their conditions and circumstances as close to those of an individual without a disability. And when I say their circumstances, what I'm discussing here is their recreational opportunities, the kinds of things that they access from a recreational standpoint. We want to ensure that they have as much possibility as anyone else to be engaged in physical activity and in environments that offer those outlets, and that they have free access and easy access, and access as available to them as it would be for a person without a disability. It's the same thing for an individual with a disability that may be school age. We want to make sure that that individual with a disability has the capability of being integrated into a public school. And that may mean that they are in that environment and happen to be educated in a substantially separate classroom, or it may mean that they're in the general education classroom and they are included. And that inclusion may require supports, of course. However, that is a goal of ours, is to once again normalize their lives. And being in the public school is certainly part of that process of being comparable or doing things comparable to a neurotypical or a non-disabled peer. So integration into the public school is essential and important, and it's an important goal. Also, for older individuals that may have a disability, say a person that is 18, 19, or in their early 20s, when they're moving into this this age bracket where employment is an option, one of the things that is important to us as individuals supporting people with disabilities is that they have good employment options as well, and that they're integrated into the workforce. I just went just a few days ago to a very impressive presentation by 2 individuals. These 2 people were from Ultra Testing, which is a software company. And they're 2 MIT graduates, Rajesh Anandan and Anat Shutman. And these 2 individuals operate out of New York, and they own Ultra Testing. And they employ individuals that have autism spectrum disorder. And one of the things that they do is a screening of individuals, and not a screening that involves a personal interview, as you and I may be accustomed to, but a kind of screening that really assesses the individuals for their capabilities and abilities in the area of doing software testing. As a result of screening and detecting and identifying individuals that may excel in that category, they employ people with autism spectrum disorder into their software company. And these individuals on the spectrum are earning a wage that's comparable, no different from a person that's typically developing, and really thriving in the context of that environment. So very impressive in terms of what they're doing with respect to really promoting people with disabilities and giving them the option of employment. And let's face it, employment really defines who we are, and it really adds to our quality of life. It's an important aspect of our life. It's not everything about our lives, but it is certainly a big, important part. And for individuals such as these two gentlemen to create these opportunities for people with disabilities, I tip my hat to them. And I think they were doing a lot with respect to the principle of normalization, and that is making available employment options for people with disabilities. I tell you all that because individuals with various forms of disabilities and conditions have historically been subjected to devaluation, marginalization, and prejudice. And anyone here going through this Registered Behavior Technician series that may have a brother or sister or a family member or even a friend with a disability, whether it be a psychiatric condition or autism spectrum disorder or a physical disability, you know, because you have witnessed firsthand that they have been subjected. These individuals that you care deeply about, that you love, have been subjected to devaluation and marginalization in many aspects of their lives. So for us, for you, going through this process of becoming a registered behavior technician, one of the things that you will want to do is to ensure that that person who you are charged with serving, who you are privileged to serve, really has every opportunity that a non-disabled person has. You know, whether it be in school, recreation, or employment, you are there to empower. And it's a very important role that you take on as a result. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is what's referred to as people-first language. And that means always putting the person before the disability. So when we talk about individuals, it's a child, for example, with autism spectrum disorder, or it's an adult with bipolar disorder, or a young woman with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Always the person is put first and foremost in front of any conversation, and that person is not defined by their disability or their condition. Just as we would not say that it's a cancer patient. We may say it's a child with leukemia, for example. When you stop and you think about this, it makes a big difference for the person that is listening to you, that is interacting with you, when you are showing to them that you see the person and they are first and foremost on your mind, and it is not their disability that is first and foremost on your mind, then that person begins interacting with you in a different way. When you put the person first, when you put people first, it makes a difference with respect to your communication and your conversation. So once again, the work that Wolfenberger has accomplished in the 70s, the entire principle of normalization is essentially important, and people-first language, quite frankly, is essentially important as well, and that is why it's being emphasized here. Because once again, you are communicating with stakeholders, and those stakeholders come from various different backgrounds. Many of them are family members, and you promoting these values will be essential and will really drive your own success as an individual. Now, I want to introduce to you the entire field of study that was really led by Charles E. Osgood. And he developed what is referred to as Osgood's semantic differential. What he means and what he's accomplished in the context of his work is to show that the words that you use, the language that you use when communicating with another individual is going to indicate an attitude that you have, or a disposition, or an orientation. So the language that you use will have an impact. And the way that a word or phrase or paragraph that is written, for example, will impact another individual will vary across individuals. So let me give you an example here. There are individuals here going through this series. You're logging in, you're listening to these training modules, you're going through this process, and each and every one of you here have a different history. So when I say these various words, the way the word is going to impact you is really going to depend on your own personal history and your own personal experiences. When I use the word cancer, that may mean something very deeply to some of you here in this room. When I say the word trauma, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or physical trauma, for example, that's going to mean something very relevant and very significant to many of you in this room. If I say auto accident or auto crash, for example, there are individuals here now going through this module, going through this series, that has a very deep meaning for. So it's the same thing for an individual who is listening to you that may have a child with a disability, or a relative, or a family member, or a friend with a disability. The way that you talk about that person with the disability is going to matter deeply to the listener, to the individual who cares deeply about the person that you're talking about, the stakeholder. These are individuals that really have a connection to these individuals, and the language that you use is going to matter. So if you communicate with dignity, if you communicate with the person's best interest in mind, that individual that you're serving, and you're talking to their family member, or you're talking to a professional that is connected to the individual's life in some way, maintaining dignified language, maintaining respectful language, and really emphasizing the person's strengths and abilities and their own unique personality is going to be very important. So that's why I give you these examples in terms of specific words, whether it be cancer, or trauma, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or automobile crash, or accident, or fatal accident, for example. If a person that you're speaking with uses any of those words without sensitivity, then for somebody here going through this training series, that could really make a difference with respect to how that language is received. So I want you to always be aware of that in terms of talking to family members and talking to other professionals, that the way you phrase things, the way that you say things, the way that you refer to people is really going to matter to these individuals. And once again, the research by Charles Osgood has shown time and time again that words and language will impact individuals in various ways, and you may not even be aware of the manner and the way in which somebody is actually being affected by the language that you use. So, what individuals will be affected? Well, once again, at the beginning of the module, I had pointed out that you'll be interfacing with physicians, you'll be interfacing with physical therapists and occupational therapists and psychologists and teachers. So those are the individuals that will be impacted by your language. And I always want to make sure that you're aware that these are the stakeholders and that your communication with them is absolutely essential. Now, with respect to your communication and what's important, I think for professionals, for family members, for them to understand your values, that will be extremely important. And once again, I'm trying to give you an orientation to the principle of normalization. I think the more we emphasize to a family member or the other professionals that we're interfacing with, that we have very clear goals and objectives. And our goal and objective is to integrate the person that we're responsible for serving in the greatest way possible into recreational opportunities, into our public schools, into our communities, into opportunities, whether it be employment or otherwise. The more we communicate that value through our actions and through our language and through our communication, the more it is evident to the listener and the stakeholder that we have the best intentions for the individual that we're serving. And once again, using people-first language is critically important. Always putting the person before the disability, always looking at that person as a unique individual and putting that first. The next thing I want to point out in terms of communication is being a real sleuth with respect to a person's strengths. One of the things I often tell individuals is that I learn and understand something about an individual to not a great extent when the person is emphasizing their weaknesses or emphasizing their disability. But what I do with an individual is strongly informed and made relevant as a result of an understanding of that person's strengths. So my message to you is to constantly search and to be a sleuth and to look for, identify, uncover an individual's personal strengths. And whenever you're capturing or identifying a strength, communicating that to other people, because it will matter to them, because they can use that strength and use the information that you may have to really impact the individual through whatever discipline they are coming from. I'm going to give you an example of that in the next slide. The other thing I want to emphasize is that tell stories about successes all the time, but never confuse stories with data or with assessment results. So it's great to highlight and to celebrate the successes of an individual, but we're always looking to quantify and to verify the progress that an individual is making. So whatever success that you have to tell about, it's always a great practice to make sure that it's data-based and that you're supporting your success story with the actual data that verifies the person's progress. That'll be critically important as well. Next, as a registered behavior technician, you have a primary obligation to take responsibility and precautions to respect the confidentiality of those individuals that you're serving. So you're really maintaining the confidentiality of the individuals that you're providing services to. So we're always doing things with informed consent. We're never sharing information unless we have explicit permission to do that. I want to point out here at this point that in the next couple of training modules that you'll be going through, I'll be providing an overview of the code of conduct and the ethics of registered behavior technicians and also board certified behavior analysts. And this is just a primer to that discussion. However, I just want to make sure that you're aware that we have an obligation to protect the confidentiality of other individuals. So this conversation and this primer right here that I'm touching on does not supplant a more thoroughgoing conversation which will occur in other modules. Okay, here is the story that I promised you, and it has to do with a young man with a diagnosis of Down syndrome. And I'm telling you this story because it comes as a result of communication from individuals that worked with this young man. So I was a stakeholder in terms of being a clinical director of a program, and within my work as a clinical director, I was approached by an individual that was a graduate student, and he was getting his master's degree in the field of physical education. And he came to me and said he wanted to do some research, and he wanted to do research in the area of Special Olympics and preparing individuals with disabilities to be athletes in the Special Olympics. And he told me that there was a young man that he wanted to work with, and he wanted that young man to learn how to hurdle, and to do that in an event in the Special Olympics. So I told him I'd be willing to work with him on that particular skill, and I asked him to bring the young man into the gymnasium that we had in the school that I was responsible for overseeing. And we put some hurdles around the periphery of the gymnasium, and they were only about an inch off the floor, or about 18 inches off the floor in some cases. And I asked the person that I was working with, his name was Michael, and I asked Michael to bring the young man around the periphery of the gym, because I wanted to see whether he would jump, whether he would hop over the hurdles or do something, because I wanted to get a sense of the baseline performance. And as this young man was walking around the periphery of the gym, he stopped in front of each of the hurdles and would not even step over them. He just stood in front of them. And then Michael, despite his coaxing and his encouragement, was unable to get this young guy to even put his foot over one of the hurdles. It was soon after that we had a meeting with the staff that worked with this young guy, and the staff were from a residential program. And one of the individuals that was providing services on a one-to-one basis and on a group basis in the community home where this individual lived indicated that on a nightly basis she took this young guy for a walk. The house that this young guy lived in happened to be right in front of a wooded area, and there was a lot of paths in back of the home. And this young woman who was telling us about her nightly walks indicated that when she went out walking, this young guy would jump over tree branches, and we would jump over boulders, and loved doing that, in fact. So, there we go. We got some communication from a stakeholder. We got communication from an individual that worked with this young guy on a regular basis. And that information was just critically important to me and Michael, and here's why. The next day, what we did is we brought in tree branches from the woods, and we brought in small boulders from the woods. The director of the school wasn't real happy that we were dragging these things into the gymnasium, but that's what we did. Because we really wanted to get this right, and we wanted to make sure that this young guy was being prepared for the Special Olympics. So we took those things. We took the tree branches, we took the boulders, and we put them on the periphery of the gymnasium. Then we asked that young woman who had been working with him on a regular basis to come in the afternoon to start her shift a little bit earlier than usual, and to come into the school and to come to the gymnasium where we were going to walk with this young guy, and walk to the tree branches and walk to the boulders to see what he would do. But we wanted her to be the support person next to him. So sure enough, she comes to work early. We bring the young guy into the gym. The tree branches are around the periphery of the gym, and the boulders around the periphery of the gym. And sure enough, as she goes walking around the gymnasium and approaches each of the tree branches and each of the boulders, this young guy jumps. He jumps over every one of the obstacles in the gymnasium. And it was just a magnificent demonstration of capability, and something that a person was able to do given the right circumstances. So what ultimately ended up happening is that we began increasing the height of those tree branches, and we eventually supplanted and replaced the tree branches with actual hurdles. And at the end of the story, the young guy that we were working with did participate in the Special Olympics event, and he won a gold medal for hurdling as a result of the training that we did. And that was an article that I published with Michael The name of the article is, we'll cross that hurdle when we get to it, Teaching Athletic Performance Within Adaptive Education, Physical Education, and it was published in the Journal of Behavior Modification. So there you go, communication from an individual, to stakeholders, and that communication really focusing on strength, and that making a real difference in an individual's life. So the communication was strength-based, it was respectful, it was informed, it was verifiable, data-driven, and made a big difference in this individual's life. At this point, I'd like to introduce Annette, who I discussed at the beginning of the module. And as I mentioned previously, she has a brother with a disability. So Annette, I think to begin, if you can tell individuals here something about your brother, just to give an orientation to the rest of the interview.
My brother is currently 12 years old, and he's been receiving services, ABA services, since about the age of 3. And he wouldn't be where he is today if it wasn't for the direct service provided from his ABA team and all the other people who are on his team, including his OTs and his PTs. He's duly diagnosed with autism and Williams syndrome, so it's quite a complex diagnosis because of the pairing of the two disabilities.
And if you can speak to these individuals here going through the RBT training, if you can give a good example, a story about really good communication, somebody that has really communicated with you and your family with great sensitivity, and then give a non-example of that, because we've all had situations and circumstances where we have been taken aback, as a result of somebody's insensitivity. So maintaining the confidentiality, of course, of the individuals that have had this communication. An example first of real good, healthy communication, and then a non-example of exactly that.
I've had a lot of examples of healthy communication in my experience because I feel that the individuals we've worked with have been amazing and we've been lucky to have them. A lot of our direct service providers who work one-to-one in the home have been great about coming to our family at the end of a really tough session and saying, hey, we had a hard day today. This is what happened. This is what I did. This is what you can do. And always it's the clarity. When people speak with clarity, that's where we find that we have a good understanding. But when we get muddy words such as like and and things like that, it becomes more difficult to have a clear understanding because I might not know like what. I might not know, this happened or that happened. So the best examples are those of clarity. Specifically, I can remember a particularly tough day with his feeding program where it was a lot of crying and a lot of screaming and just a lot of escape maintained behaviors, and we all had a tough time coping with it. And it was beautiful to have the person who was working with him be able to explain to us exactly what happened and also praise us for staying uninvolved and keeping our distance during that time because it was a very specific teaching example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how about an example of maybe something that's happened in the community? You spent a lot of time with your brother, obviously, in the community, and you're coming in contact with people all the time, passerbys and strangers. I'm just wondering about a real nice example of a kind, considerate exchange, and how it impacted you. Maybe words that were said, maybe something that was done that really impacted you as his sister, and your family, and your mom and dad. So maybe just an example of that as well.
I think when we talk about the community, we have to keep in mind that our community of people who have disabilities is very narrow. We don't necessarily do all the things that a typical family would do, like going out to the park all the time or going to certain amusement parks or engaging in those kinds of activities. because we are a little bit more restricted. David doesn't want to do everything. So sometimes when we go out, he's not wanting to be there. And usually when we're within our community, people are very understanding and they know and they've all been through it and they've all seen it. But when we go out into a place where it's not as obvious, that people may not know that he has a disorder, it's much more difficult for us to be able to explain it. And the best people are the people who look at you and there's just an exchange, a glance that you know that they understand and they're not getting involved because they know that you are handling it exactly how you should be and the best that you can. And it's the people who do get involved unnecessarily that tend to cause more harm than benefit.
And if you were doing a TED lecture and you were being broadcast on this TED lecture, and you were doing that to give advice to individuals here, for example, that are going through the Registered Behavior Technician training, what would be some of your concluding comments or poignant remarks to the group to really prepare them for doing this work?
I think the most important value of communication and effective communication is to understand that the person in front of you is a human being and that they are capable of emotions such as anger and fear and joy and compassion, and that that's okay. If somebody gets angry at something you said, it's not at you that they're mad, it's at the information that's upsetting. If somebody's afraid of what you said, that's okay. And that you have to let people experience these emotions and live through them and be compassionate about those emotions and say, I can see that you're mad right now. And it's okay for you to be upset. And I can see that what I've told you is scary and you're afraid, but I'm here to help you. And just keeping in mind that you're not working with a bunch of robots and that everybody has that soft spot. No matter how hard a person's shell may seem, there's always a soft spot and a way to get in. And those are actually the times that you have to choose to be able to bond and grow your relationship. And don't let those kinds of experiences scare you.
Annette, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Michael.
Thank you. The next section, I will conclude with some of the questions that that relate to the information that that has been shared. The first question is, what is normalization? The normalization principle. And once again, it means making available to all people with disabilities patterns of life and conditions of everyday living which are as close as possible to the circumstances that a person without a disability would encounter. That's what normalization means. So that takes the form of ensuring that the people that we're serving have recreational opportunities and educational opportunities and employment opportunities that are comparable to a typically developing peer or a neurotypical individual. What's meant by people first language and why it's important? The answer, of course, is putting the person before the disability. And it may be a simple thing in terms of concept, but in translation and in practice, it matters. And always putting the emphasis on the individual, that young boy, that young girl, or the adult that you're serving is the focal point and not their disability. What is a stakeholder? You know, of course, those people that are affected by your services or may have an impact on services. So once again, families are stakeholders. You know, sisters and brothers and moms and dads and aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers are all stakeholders in terms of services. But also people in public schools and also the other professionals that comprise a wraparound team are stakeholders in this field. Who are the stakeholders? A registered behavior technician will likely communicate with family members, school teachers, administrators, university faculty, politicians, specifically speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, primary care doctors, dentists, barbers. All of these individuals will be folks that you come in contact with, and you'll have communication with on a regular basis. And then finally, what's meant by a strength-based approach? Well, it's placing an emphasis on a person's self-determination and strengths and developing programs based on their abilities and not focusing on their disabilities, but really looking what they do and they do well, and really allowing that to be the basis for teaching exactly everything. Thank you so much for staying with it during this entire module, and I look forward to seeing you in the next training module.